an innate feature of the human animal to make things way more complicated than they need to be. Sometimes perhaps because a complicated thing is easier not to do. Sometimes I think it is because a simple answer is the hardest one. This is the very end of the lots of people come to Jesus and try and ask him tricky questions to get him to say something that will allow them to kill him section of this gospel. They are trying to trick Jesus, but this is actually a pretty easy question. Lots of rabbis had spent lots of time deciding what was the essence of the entire Torah, and they pretty much all agreed. Love of God and love of your neighbor was not actually that hard of an answer. Deuteronomy 6 has, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength." And then from Leviticus, which everybody wants to pretend is like this really awful book, says, "You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against any of your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord." Everybody in this scene already knows this. Loving God and loving neighbor is the heart of the law. There has developed this sort of false dichotomy, I think, between faith and law, as if the 600 and however many commandments are not just the details of love. When we ask ourselves any particular question and try to figure out how to navigate our way through a complicated world, we can just ask, does this smell like love? Does this taste like love on my lips when I speak? I think sometimes the law is nothing but our faith when it hits the cold, sharp air of this world. Like a snowflake forming or a little sugar crystal on a string. If love has so supersaturated our lives, then every little decision will just be a unique expression of that love. Having faith in love generally is much easier than the specific love that you have to muster up when a neighbor writes you an angry letter. Having faith in love generally is much easier when there is not heartbreak or a diagnosis or the long gray hopelessness of despair. Faith, when it is untouched by this world and all of the other messy people in it, can be a satisfyingly interior experience. Me and God alone in prayer and in worship, under the surface in the dark soil of our souls. The question of the law asks us, what now? How will your faith thrive when it breaks above the surface and feels the dry wind? Which law will you follow? There are so many to choose from. There are laws about being right. There are laws of being impressive. There are laws of winning. But this God of our scriptures, the God who formed us, the God embodied in Jesus, always says it is only the law of love. And then Jesus's response to all of these people asking him tricky questions is a question about what is at their hearts. What do you think of the Messiah? He asks. What he is asking is, who do you think that I am? Who do you think that I am to have any authority to ask such smart people like yourselves to step out into the unknown and let go of your certainty and your position and power? If he is claiming this messiahship, how can he prove that he has the authority? If he is inviting them to disrupt everything they have devoted their lives to preserving, why should they listen to him? And at first, I will admit this sounds like some straight up nonsense and doesn't make sense. The Lord said to my Lord, until the footstool, all of this. What? This law of David, the law of like lineage and authority, if the Messiah is nothing but the right person in the right family tree, then this is a story of patriarchy and not love. If it is nothing but the lineage of David, then anybody in that long list of ancestors could have spoken with this authority, but that is not the identity of the Messiah. He asks them a political question and reveals that it is just the one who speaks love as the ultimate truth and is willing to live that law of love all the way to the cross. This summation of the law is actually the beginning of the work. And it is too easy to choose complexity over simplicity. It is too easy to choose complexity because then we can get lost in the details and never obey the distressing call to actually love. If we can just keep focusing on how hard it is, then we will let ourselves off the hook. And please, we must be very careful never to think of this as a Jewish problem. It is a human problem. This desire to make anything more complicated, to keep ourselves feeling safe and smart. It is like the lawyer or finance person who makes you more confused after asking a question. And it takes someone really, really amazing to let things be simple. The wonderful Jesuit priest John Deere describes when he talks about nonviolence, people try to come up with these convoluted scenarios in which they just get to kill somebody. But what if, they say, there was a guy with a gun who came at the... Instead of confronting in their own heart this desire for vengeance and violence, this desire to overly complicate an invitation to love. But what if, we ask, what if I come up with a scenario in which I no longer have to love, in which I no longer have to set down my own self-privileging, in which I get to just not love? What about that? Because I think what Jesus is saying is that if our faith does not look like love when it shows up in the world, if we think we are following something that gets us out of this awful call to love, then we may not be done, and we need to sink our roots deeper. Because the God of love is always calling us out of captivity and deeper into freedom, out of bondage and further into liberation. The voice of love is always calling and always whispering, and the good news is that it is simple. Just love God and love your neighbor, and the really bad news is that it is simple. Just love God and love your neighbor. Not just in theory, but in practice, to take each moment of our lives and hold it up in the bright light of love. To look at everything we do from different angles. And we will never get it perfect. But I think it is better to always err on the side of love, and if we make a mistake, make mistakes for love. I love Psalm 1, and while it is obviously overly simple, we cannot just decide today to plant ourselves in righteousness and be done. But the idea that every day when the wind blows, we sink our roots down deeper. Every day that we meditate on the law of love, we plant ourselves on the banks by the river of the water of life. And we will be like thirsty trees, and when the hot, dry windstorm comes, we sink our roots as deep as we possibly can into the love that flows through this world. Because love made you and love loves you. So drink it up and love this world back with everything you've got, because it might just be that simple. Amen.